talk about today, I guess, is really centred around this as a fairly singular point in time, and none of us really noticed and really paid attention at the time that it happened. The date for us in Sydney was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday, the 2nd of May 2000, and that is when the civilian GPS system was changed so that we no longer had a locality framework that gave us, in essence, somewhere between half to a full length of a rugby field. We were down to around about 2 metres, half a metre through to 2 metres. And that happened, as you can see from this particular graph here, taken from some work by Humphreys. That happened basically instantly. And the ramifications of that in terms of what we do in road safety, how we use vehicles, how we manage vehicles within the road transport system are still only being explored and envisaged as we speak, some 10 or 12 years later. Always connected sensors are now proliferating. So if you've got a smartphone, it's got all of this stuff in it. It just comes now as stock standard. It's got video, it's got audio, it's got a clock, it's got GPS, it's got accelerometer, Wi-Fi. It can have material relate or sensors that relate to temperature and pressure. And you can use this material, as Billy was just indicating there, to work out where you are, when you're there, what you're doing. You can make some pretty good guesses. You're in a vehicle at the time when this is actually happening. Although, as Anne McCart mentioned this morning, there are some issues in that you can fool it by being on a train sometimes. You need to be careful about how you're doing it. And it already knows who is involved because you're the person who's carrying the smartphone. Smartphones and their telephone numbers are pretty much becoming fairly unique identifiers for knowing that this particular person was at this particular place. What's happening is that that functionality is now being incorporated for devices that can either be fitted as OEM, original equipment manufacturer, or can come in as aftermarket devices. And that particularly relates to navigation devices in vehicles and our smartphones. The aftermarket systems, commonly known as portable pneumatic devices, are quite widespread, but you're starting to see the OEM technology coming into vehicles, I must say, at remarkably exorbitant cost. So I think they may die out fairly quickly. The nav systems themselves are essentially marketed and they're used primarily for wayfinding, but another important use is the point of interest function that comes with these nav systems. So most of these systems will now identify school zones which are subject to special speed limits at particular times of the day and days of the week and weeks of the year. It will also indicate areas that are regarded as high risk, such as railway level crossings. It will also typically identify fixed speed and red light camera locations and give you warnings, and it will give you information about the speed limit for the roadway. If the devices are configured so that they will work as an advisory intelligent speed adaptation system, they will then deliver alerts or warnings to a driver when the speed limit is exceeded. And typically that's done with an audible but also some visual material. A lot of the early ISA research looked at providing haptic alerts as well, but for the SatNavs they are typically just audio and visual alerts that are coming through. Curiosity about those sorts of things is that the audio warnings are limited in duration. They can be deactivated. They are often quite obscure. Some of them are, the alerts that you get are actually meaningful and make sense. So a speed camera location will be a sound, so you know that you're coming up to a speed camera situation. It's the information for showing that you're exceeding the speed limit is usually fairly vague. It's you have to remember, what is it telling me? Is it telling me I'm exceeding the speed limit? When you try and work out why particular manufacturers and the designers of the system have chosen the things that they've done for the displays and for the alerts. It's really difficult to find out why on earth they made their decisions. The research, if there was research that underpins this, is marketing research, I would suggest, rather than a formal scientific research. On top of that, there are no current standards or agreed functional requirements, although there are moves afoot, particularly in Europe, to actually start to develop some kind of specifications for that. So the question that relates to the work that I'll be reporting here today is how can we get SatNav manufacturers, suppliers and marketers to build in and then promote the ISA systems across their range of products. We already know that consumer information programs can be very effective, and the Child Restraint Evaluation Program and the NCAP programs are really good examples of how we can come up with good consumer-focused rating systems that people will find meaningful and easy to use. And so we need to basically sit down and work out, can we come up with requirements for functional performance of these kinds of devices? And if so, how would some kind of rating system actually work? Faced with that question, the Centre for Road Safety here in New South Wales, part of the then RTA, now part of Transport for New South Wales, commissioned what is just an exploratory study, which I'll be mentioning today, where we were looking about what kind of rating system, what kind of evaluation process could be essentially feasible, and was it practical to go out and actually do it. One of the important issues, of course, is that with these kinds of devices, their primary function for an ISA system is to tell you information about exceeding the speed limit, but it's not what you actually want to go out and test. You don't want to actually do an illegal behaviour to actually test. And so that's one of the really crucially important questions that our particular functionality assessment doesn't address, but I just wanted to mention that in part. So we looked at 4 SatNav devices that were available just at the back end of 2011, I think it was. 3 of them were in the classic portable nomadic device SatNav kind of things. One was a smartphone device. We tested them on road in a scenario that was basically reflective of the situations where they would be used. We set everything at their default settings for this particular assessment process, and then observed them as they were in use, and we ran them through, in some cases on several iterations, just to explore the different kinds of settings. The smartphone application only had a Melbourne map in it, so it was tested outside of Tullamarine. All the rest of the routes were in Sydney, based on the old location of the Centre for Road Safety in North Sydney. We came up with what we thought were an appropriate minimum set of specifications, the critical features we wanted, the performance standards that we wanted. And they were categorised in terms of feature performance, hardware, the human factors and ease of use, and the mapping performance. And we just simply rated them on a scale. If they were poor, it was 0, through to, if they were good, we gave them a score of 3. To give you an idea of some of the criteria, this is just a selection of the first 8 in our sequence that was really focused on school zones. Criteria, did it include a school zone? It was either yes or no. Most of the first 7 there are just yes-no ones. With regard to the audible alert, the bottom one there, the ratings were good through to acceptable, marginal and poor, and they were the descriptors that we used to actually pick up on that. For vehicle traffic noise, the vehicle was, it was the same vehicle every time, and the windows were always up, so it was a sealed vehicle in that sense. And this was the kind of outcome that we got from testing across the kit. The 4 different devices. And you can see that just for this particular exploratory study, we just looked at a sort of a top 20 or so. And the important thing to mention about this is just simply the scatter that we've got. In other words, we really are picking up on a whole range of performance, and that was essentially what we were looking to see, whether the functional specifications were actually able to tease and pull apart the various devices. The paper itself actually has all the devices listed in terms of identifying which ones did what. So in several criteria there were substantial differences between the SatNav devices that claimed that they were isofunctional, and so we concluded that the kind of approach we were taking has the potential to encourage manufacturers to improve the functionality, simply because we could come up with a rating system that would indicate whether the devices were performing well, acceptably, marginally or poor. Importantly, no SatNav device came out as being totally or totally great. They were all within a band across their performance. And so that would seem to be indicating that the range of criteria are quite relevant in terms of teasing these apart. So we concluded that in a practical sense, the assessments appeared repeatable, relevant and objective. As I indicated, there are no standards or assessment protocols that are complete and directly relevant to ISO devices. So this is the first that we're aware of that has actually started to explore that. There has been, as is the nature of this field, there has been considerable development work since this work was done. So there are proposed standards and assessment protocols that people are starting to think about. I mentioned before that the research basis for how these devices actually work seems to be particularly poor, and if it does exist, it exists in an unpublished form. There are concerns about the way that we present information if you're looking at these devices as not being wayfinding, navigation devices, and being devices that give you relevant and appropriate information about speed. So this is just taking a snapshot of several of the devices in several SatNav devices. And as you can see, just the whole design and delivery of the display is really devoted to the map. The speed information, you really have to search within that to find what it is, and you may have to search quite a lot to distinguish between what the relevant speed limit is as opposed to what your particular vehicle speed is. They're not highly identified at all. So in the second part of the presentation, I just wanted to alert you to what Billy was talking about in terms of where we can go forward in relation to this, and also just to alert you to how quickly the technology is changing. We know at a governmental level there's been trials that have been done around the world, including in Australia, that ISA works. And so the National Road Safety Strategy actually makes a number of quite explicit statements about where we should go in terms of the development of ISA systems and the support of ISA systems within Australia. And we're starting to see some of the implementation of some of the recommendations from the National Road Safety Strategy. The core question, of course, is that I'm not sure that the community necessarily believes that all of these kinds of things that we know are really important are things that they should consider. So we know from extensive evidence that most people think that they're good drivers, but we know that most people will admit that they exceed the speed limit most of the time. And I think the last news poll survey that Amy published as part of their 2011 crash index, it was 50% of Australian drivers in their survey admitted that they will quite routinely drive 10 kilometres or more over the speed limit. So there's some real issues here. There's also the question of the fact that just the very way that we present information about speed can be a little confusing, a little difficult for drivers to understand, because we present them with speed limits that change by locality, by time of day, by climate, by licence class, by kind of vehicle you're driving, all of those sorts of things. You've got to manage all of that kind of information. We also give you advisory speed limits on curves. We exhort you to maintain the traffic speed, but at the same time to drive according to the conditions. And we expect that drivers actually juggle all of that kind of information about. On top of that, speed is a transitory problem. It's not like an impairment through drug and alcohol where you can't be not impaired. It is simply a circumstance where you can be speeding one moment and not speeding the next, or speeding 1 minute and not speeding the next, and you can oscillate around them. given that the primary sanction for speeding offences is fines, it gives rise to this whole question of government cash cow, revenue raising, and people see speeding as being a speed fine problem, not a speeding problem. For the ISA systems, it is really apparent that government is not really radically addressing the issue currently. It's the private sector that is delivering in terms of ISA, and they are delivering both in terms of that governmental requirement for compliance, but they're also very well aware and marketing in terms of managing your speed fines. And the private sector involvement has been through the standalone SatNavs, but now it's smartphones, and this is the big message I wanted to present today. Smartphones are just coming through, pouring through into the Australian community. Extraordinary market growth of about 40% year on year. It's projected that about 9% of mobile phone users will have smartphones within a couple of years, and the pricing will go down to below $50 and typically below $100. So they'll be very, very readily accessible. So the shift is from this kind of stuff to this. It proposes an immediate and vexing question, given that use of a handheld phone is prohibited in every Australian jurisdiction, and use of a hands-free phone is prohibited in a number of Australian jurisdictions if you're a novice driver. But here we have a smartphone, a mobile phone under the legislation that can be used to deliver what we know are quite significant road safety benefits. That's something which police, road safety workers and legislators will need to deal with. As I indicated, we already provide point of interest functions in our mapping, and that is disseminated free in terms of the maps that we get. Some of the applications are not well received because they're designed to actually allow drivers to evade enforcement activity rather than supporting general safety. But nonetheless, they're legal to sell, they're commonly available, and they're commonly used by drivers. What you're going to see is that on navigation systems, it'll be the Google Maps application. It will be available freely within smartphones. And as Bill indicated, at least one company, which is the SpeedAlert or Smart Car Technologies, is releasing a free app for iPhones and Google Android devices fairly soon. One of the things I like about it is that the presentation of the speed information, it's now not a focus in terms of navigation, the focus is in terms of speed. So this is the kind of material that you actually get presented when you have the device in your car. And I think I'll stop at that point. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thanks Ian. Any quick question, Jules?
Ian, I'm just a little bit confused. Do you mean these systems will feed back to you what the prevailing speed limit is, or
Yes.
are they measuring your speed?
Both.
Both.
Speed limit, your speed.
Okay.
Okay. So
one of the things that we found with what Lauren's work was that you need to take a lot of care with accelerometers and what accelerometers are telling you, and so I just wonder, like, maybe as well as the usability, we need to be looking at the actual performance.
Well, I think Billy sort of addressed that at the end of Lauren's talk. This is what the device, this is Bill's company device, what it looks like. You can basically, with a lot of the discussions that we had, particularly in terms of the project that we did with the Centre for Road Safety, was looking at this question. You really can't allow tolerances, you can't allow illegal behaviour. So if you're looking to regulate ISA devices through a government component, that is a vexing problem because of that whole notion of people driving a little bit over the limit and maintaining traffic speed and so on. If you're looking at a private sector purely delivered product, which is what this one is, it would probably not be performing well on some of the functionality of that system that I described at the beginning, simply because the user, it's been designed now that the user can actually set the tolerances, set the target speeds and those sorts of things. But once you've done that, If you've set your target speed so you want to be at 50, you've just come over 50, you get an amber alert, you've just come over the 50 speed limit, you're doing 51. If you set it at 55 as being your, I don't want to tolerate any speed in excess of that, then you'll shift to this kind of display, which the reason I like it from the human factors point of view is it's really obvious. You're starting to provide unambiguous information. It's not the bing, 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 dong, 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 whatever the crazy symbols and noises and so on that you're looking, or you're looking within a navigation display to find something about the speed. At least with these products, they're designed to deliver you with what your target information is, which is what is your vehicle speed, what is the speed limit, and what are you doing relative to each of those.
I mean, we designed the system to be sort of usable, effective and desirable, because a system that pisses off the consumers, if you have the bleeping too aggressive, go, that's rubbish, hit delete. And so it's finding that balance of what is effective and what the public will actually wear. But also some people, personally, my kids are always screaming in the car, so if I don't have a really aggressive, loud bleeping noise, it'll just get drowned out by the kids. So we've got the ability to kind of ratchet it up to something really quite annoying if that's what I so choose.
I think there was a question here.
I just wanted to clarify, so the speed is calculated by GPS location, which is transmitted second by second, so the accuracy of that is only as good as the amount of satellite coverage you've got at a moment in time, which is typically improving all the time. But and I think one step back, I want to go back to Lauren's presentation, is that using the devices in a research context is different to a commercial context, and the work that Lauren's done is very essential, and we really wanted to understand the device and exactly how it works, and I think we're happy with it moving forward with some more development of the algorithms.
I guess my message is simply that the market is moving faster than we can possibly understand. You know, the work that we did for the Centre of Road Safety a year ago is now essentially supplanted because look at, you know, we were talking about being able to have this functionality in vehicles. We did all of our calculations in terms of cost effectiveness and so on, all based on pricing around that $200 to $500 mark. And now the damn thing's free, you know. So it's just moving really, really quickly. And this is the last thing I stopped pushing, give me a yell, but I just wanted to mention this kind of stuff here. This, again, is private sector. This is not government. This is not policy setting per se. This is the private sector actually, again, delivering the kind of stuff. And Anne talked about that a little bit, or referred to it, and she actually got asked a question about it. One of the CASA folk who asked the question about insurances and so on at Anne's talk. But this is a coming. It's not in Australia currently, but it's available in the UK and in the US, where essentially your insurance product and the pricing that you pay is based on how you're driving the vehicle. It's all the stuff that you guys were talking about. The problem is that this is public sector, this is business case, this is actually out there in the community currently. And that is a real problem for this whole technology, is it's just moving at such an extraordinary pace that you can't keep.
Speaking of moving, I guess we'd better allow people to go to lunch, so if you've got more questions, please come and ask in.